Okay, so today I want to talk about the relationship between Texas, United States, and state of Texas. So I'm going to use an analogy to help explain this. When I was in the Navy, I left, honorably discharged, and before I started college, I had a friend who worked at a private lodge. So I was able to get a job working at this lodge and until I started college, and then after that I worked there part-time. But this lodge had a main building, okay, and the main building had a dining area, a kitchen, a lounge, a bar, and restrooms. Okay, I worked in the kitchen and I helped prepare food and serve food. So the members of the lodge would come from all over. These were very wealthy people who came to this lodge that was right next to the water for hunting and fishing and just sometimes just hanging out, and their wives would go shopping and such. So they paid to be members at this lodge, but when they came, they didn't just hang out in the main building. They would have cabins. And each family usually had their own cabin unless they agreed to share a larger cabin with another family. Okay, so there were cabins just kind of all over the place. And these were very wealthy people that came here, and they were all actually very nice. They wanted to leave their elite lives in New York and California and Virginia and come to South Texas, where this lodge was, and go duck hunting and fishing and shopping in the town. And so I worked there. I worked there part-time. Okay. So this is similar to the way government is set up. Okay. In the Constitution, you have Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, which talks about the seat of government, which is Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., and this is where the Congress members meet. But there's another place, okay? The other place is the lodges, the private lodges. If you've watched Dirty Dancing, it's like that. Like, I'm older and I've seen the movie probably a million times, but you know, they meet up at the main building for dinner and dancing and hanging out, and then they go back to their cabins with their family. So Congress members are actually from a private cabin, and they go to the seat, and they have a place there, an office there, and then they have an office also, like a more private office back in the state, okay? So the other place are the lands purchased. So you have the seat, and then you have lands purchased. Now in Texas did not sell its lands, it only leased its lands. So let's say that each state has its set of private lodges. So here's a state, okay? Here's a state. Here's a state. Okay, and any of these can be Texas or any other state. So each of these blue squares is a state, and each of the black squares inside the blue square is the land belonging to the seat. Okay, now if you go to atlas.gov, you will find maps for all the states that show the federal lands in the state. Okay, I have one here. I've showed this on almost every single one of my videos. Here's a list of the federal lands, color-coded, and these are the colored areas in the state. Okay, so here's Texas. That's the blue square. And then the little areas in here are the black squares, okay, that belong to the seat. Okay, so we have, here's a land purchased, here's a land purchased, here's a land purchased. All these are lands purchased. So when the members of Congress go back to the state, they're going to their offices, okay, back in the states. Now this is where people's brains don't let them realize what I'm telling them is that these black squares all together without the blue square. So the blue square is not federal lands. Okay? These are not federal lands. Only the black squares are federal lands. They're the lands purchased. Okay? By the seat. For defense purposes. Defense. C-E. Defense with a C. That's how it's in the Constitution. Defense with a C is Norse, also called Old French, for fortification. So these are supposed to be, according to the Constitution, military reservations or posts. Okay, not the blue. The blue is not the United States. The black areas, the federal lands, are the United States. Okay, so people believe the whole thing is the United States. It's not. Only these areas. There is a government report put out in 1956 was part 1. 1957 was part 2. It's called Jurisdiction over Federal Areas Within the States. Okay, jurisdiction is power and authority. That's how it's defined. Jurisdiction is defined as power and authority. So power and authority over the United States areas within the states. Okay, because the federal areas are the areas belonging to the United States. So all these areas combined, the black squares, the private cabins, so to speak, are the United States. Okay? So the black areas without the blue areas, which are the states, are the federal lands. The blue areas without the black areas are the United States of America. Okay, now this is where people's brains wig out because it goes against everything that they were taught, everything that they believe to be true. They can't understand it. But not understanding this is how we got to the position where we're in, where the federal government controls everything. Okay? People believe the federal government controls everything. It doesn't. It only controls these areas, because those are the only places where the lands were purchased or ceded. So when I say Texas, I'm talking about the blue. When I say United States, I'm talking about the black, all the black areas. When I'm talking about state of Texas, let's say that this one is Texas, even though it should probably be this one, because we're by the water. This is Texas, okay? This one is Texas. So the state, all this is Texas. All these inside are part of the United States. But when we're talking about just these areas in Texas, we're talking about state of Texas. Okay, they're part of the United States, but there's a contract between Texas and the United States so that these people on these lands can come off. Without this contract, these people could not come off these lands. So in order for them to come off the lands, there had to be a contract, okay? So these people come off and they use the schools and they use the hospitals and they use the roads. So there's got to be roads, right? And in order for them to be able to use the roads, there had to be the creation of another jurisdiction. Okay, and that other jurisdiction that's not in the Constitution is created in the contract, okay, between Texas and the United States. Now these federal areas are considered states, okay? And people say, well, what about the Constitution where it says you can't have a state within a state? So let's take this state. Let's just take Texas, okay? Texas. Texas is not controlled by the seat of government. So this state is not in the Constitution. Only these states are in the Constitution. So when it says a state cannot this and a state cannot that and a state blah blah blah, it's talking about the creation of the state of Texas, these states. Okay, and state of whatever state you're in. I'm in Texas, so I use Texas as an example. If you're in Oklahoma or Maine or Virginia, it's basically all the same. It's just the contracts between your state and the United States may be a little different from other states, and that's not uncommon. Okay, so this state, all of these states, I call them, and I think they're as well called the same thing in this document, and you can get this document, this report, from hathitrust.org, HATHITRUST.org. They're called dependent states in the Constitution. Well, they're not called dependent states in the Constitution, but they're dependent states because they're created by the Constitution and the men in Congress. 1868 congressional record. Mr. Cowan says, what are the states? Are the states created by the people, or are the states created by Congress? These are the states created by Congress. These are the states created by the people. This state is created by the people. It's a lawfully created state. These states, federal areas, are created by Congress. These are dependent states, or together a dependent state inside Texas called State of Texas. You see this map here is just called Texas. This is Texas. These are State of Texas. And it's really not these, it's really the paper contract between the seat and this Texas for the administration of these areas inside Texas, because Texas had its own contract. Maine had its own contract. Oklahoma, all the states had their own contract with the federal government, United States. Okay, so these private cabins or states, when you go on a cruise ship, they're called stater rooms, right? These are states, they're belonging to the seat, called the state of whatever, are dependent. They're created by the Constitution and the Congress. So they cannot have a state inside of it. There cannot be created another state inside of it. That would be a contract inside of a contract. We can't do that. We can only have the contract. So these guys in here, they can't say, we agreed to follow your contract, but then inside of here, we're going to make some agreements with some other people inside of here who are not going to agree to the contract. And so they're going to have their own stuff. And then what? They take over, the new contract takes over the old contract, and then you have now a conflict. Okay? So there cannot be a contract because Texas always has to be the person who has the say-so in the creation of the contract. So if they create a state within a state, they're creating a new contract in the state without Texas, between state of Texas, and then the new people who they're trying to, and that's kind of what happens when the Congress doesn't follow the Constitution, which it's really not. They've created a state within a state. So don't think of a state as just a place on land. Think of a state as a contract, something that exists on paper, policies. Okay, when you have a contract, the laws are listed in the contract. And then therefore you have the law. So the Constitution has laws in it, and those are the laws of the lands, these lands. The Constitution is the law of these lands and the seat of government, because it's the law for the United States to benefit. When they follow their own laws, they benefit us in these states. It's for our benefit, United States of America. This is what people mean when they say jurisdiction. The seat has jurisdiction, which is power and authority over these. Now, when it talks about the state of Texas Constitution, it's talking about the Constitution that is the contract or the administration of the things in the contract, the laws in the contract for these areas. Because these areas and what going off the areas into the state is the state of Texas, which is the contract, how things are going to be done. So when Texas requires people living outside the federal lands, these areas, to get a driver's license, they're actually doing something illegal, because we are not required to get a driver's license with the state of Texas because we're not part of the contract. We don't need to come off our lands to go somewhere. Okay, we're not administered in that way. We're not under control from the federal government. We're not supposed to be. But they get confused between who's who, between who's on here and who's off here, because everyone claims to be a citizen of the United States. So that's a citizen of the United States, right? A citizen is a member of, in a geographical sense, means within. And the U.S. is the federal lands. These federal lands. Okay? So when we claim to be a citizen of the United States, we're claiming to be on federal lands. One of those people, okay? These people, because they don't live off federal land, well, originally they didn't live off federal lands, they all lived on federal lands. And if you ever are in the Leavenworth, Kansas area, you can go up to the VA hospital there in Leavenworth, which would be up in the corner in Kansas City area. They have still, at least back in 07, 06, the original housing where the military members and the employees and the officers lived. So you can go there and you can see all the old houses. The nurses lived there, the doctors lived there, the veterans lived in the hospital, the ones that required constant care, and any military officers administering the area, the veteran hospital would be there. I believe they also had barracks there for people who didn't require immediate hospital care, but maybe had to be watched over and stuff. Their orderlies, everyone lived on the federal land. So in order for them to send their kids off to go to school, there had to be the contract. The contract had to be written. They had to be citizens of the United States. To go off, they needed to contribute their fair share. So they had to pay a tax and the license according to the AMJUR, which is the American Jurisprudence Treaty, which is what all the lawyers and attorneys and judges and clerks use. Says that the license is a tax. Okay, so these people had to get a license in order to drive off. They had to get a birth certificate to go to school. They had to do all these things so that they could contribute to the states for using their services. Okay, and that's written in a report. Jurisdiction over federal areas within states. In the report, there's a lot of really good stuff in this report. So anyone who's, instead of going out and marching and picketing and spending all your time preaching on the internet, you could just read this report, and you don't have to read it word for word. You can just kind of skim through and read some good stuff. A lot of it is particular to each state, so you could just read about your state. Okay, so these areas, the big blue areas, are the independent states. So you have dependent states and independent states. The independent states are mentioned in the Articles of Confederation, okay? I write it as AOC, Articles of Confederation, not Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. No, not her. Articles of Confederation, which says these are the United States without the black areas. They're independent, they're free, and they're sovereign. Without being free and sovereign, they could not join into a union. They had to be free and sovereign in order to join into the union called the United States. Once they joined into the union, they only contributed pieces of land. They only contributed some lands for defense with the sea, which was the erection of states requiring services from the original independent state, creating a contract called State of Texas or whatever state for defense with the sea purposes, not defense with the S is Latin for vengeance. And I get that from the Chambers Etymological Dictionary. And also from de Vattel, who is French, and he wrote about it in the Law of Nations. Okay, so secession. The blue state can secede from the Union. The black state cannot, because the black state is dependent on the federal government. The blue state is supposed to be free, sovereign, and independent. Napolitano says that the Constitution was being subverted before the ink even dried. Patrick Newman, who's a professor, I think is an economic professor, but he also speaks on the Mises Institute. You can find some of his videos online. He says it took only 8 years. So I guess maybe he was being more technical. He said 8 years. Napolitano has a lot of figurative speech in his talks, and he says before the ink even dried. Okay, I would say 8 years is pretty much before the ink even dried. So by the time the Civil War came along and the states were kicking out the federal government from its lands, that was called secession. Some people wrote that they were returning to the Articles of Confederation, but they didn't have to return to the Articles of Confederation. They already were part of the Articles of Confederation, and that was secession. So when you kick out these dependent areas, that basically is secession. You don't have to return to the Articles of Confederation, but when you kick out these areas, you're kind of automatically back into the Articles of Confederation without the United States, without the federal areas. That's secession. But we're still part of the Articles of Confederation because the United States of America is created in the Articles of Confederation, which gives the states their freedom, their sovereignty, and their independence in order for them to join the Union. Even though they didn't join the Union their whole state, they only joined the Union by allowing the federal government to put federal areas in its state for defense purposes. So the state of Texas, being a contract, can't secede from the Union. It's impossible for a contract to secede from the thing that it was created by, and that's in here. Okay, so the federal lands in Texas have a contract called State of Texas. State of Texas cannot secede from the Union. State of Texas cannot secede from the Union because it's a creation between Texas and the federal government. Okay? It's impossible. It's an impossibility. It cannot secede from the Union. If it tried to secede from the Union, there would be a violent revolution because Texas owns these lands. The federal government does not own these lands because the federal government didn't purchase the lands in Texas the way the Constitution says are lands purchased. It only leased them. My question is, where's the money? Where's that money? So if the governor currently and all the legislators say that they are part of the state of Texas, they don't represent the blue people. They represent the federal people on the federal lands. So where is the Republic of Texas? Okay, now there's a group of people who call themselves Republic of Texas, and they're saying they've reconstituted the old republic. It doesn't matter to me if you get involved with them or not. You know, people do what they want to do. I'm not particularly involved with them. I know of them. I've had some dealings with them. And I think that if people wanted to vote for the people running office that was created by that group, then fine, I don't care. But the Republic of Texas has to be the one to secede from the Union. It cannot be State of Texas. State of Texas is a contract between these areas, not Texas, okay? That would be like saying these areas created by the federal government are going to create its own state, and then that's a state within a state. Even though it kind of is a state, it's dependent on the United States. The contract called State of Texas administers these areas, and it cannot secede from the Union. So a bit of history is that when the last Republic of Texas Constitution was written in like 1829 or so, it was for the Republic of Texas, but then came along the joining of the Union. And the joining of the Union occurred in 1845, and we were created a State of Texas Constitution to administer the areas, because this had already been done by many other states. So by the time Texas joined the Union in 1845, it was already, the states of whatever were already in play. The contracts were already created. They already realized that there were issues and that they needed to create the contracts between for concurrent jurisdiction, which was so that the people on the federal lands could move around. Okay, so Texas never sold the lands, they only leased the lands. And so Texas, the Republic of Texas, constituted in 1829 or so, joined the Union and created State of Texas, the contract, in 1845. And after joining the Union, the Capitol in Austin was built. Let's just put it like right here. Capitol in Austin, okay? You can read this online if you go and look at the Capitol website. You can read it online. They built it after joining the Union and creating State of Texas inside Texas, but yet on the rotunda floor of the Capitol building it says Republic of Texas. So if Texas had no republic any longer, why would it say Republic of Texas on the Capitol building floor after it joined the Union to create State of Texas? Okay, because State of Texas did not control the whole state. The people create the republic lawfully. It's a lawful state. It's created by the people. This is a legal state. It's a contract. So Cowan in 1868 asked, what is the state? Is it something created by Congress, or is it something created lawfully by the people of the state? If it's a contract created by Congress, it's a legal state. If it's a state created by the population of people in that area, it's a lawful state. It's lawfully created, legally created. So here's the lawful state, the independent state, and here are the legal states, dependent states. A legal state cannot secede from the Union, a lawful state can. And you secede from the Union simply by kicking the areas out. Okay? Just take out, and you don't actually have to take out the federal areas. You can keep them. Texas could keep them because it never sold the land. Okay? So what is it going to do with these lands? Well, it would institute its own military. And it would be called the Texas Post or Republic of Texas Post, Navy, Army, Air Force, maybe there's gonna be an Air Force. Their posts. Post does not just mean a post office. A post is a messenger, a stick in the ground, a military station. Okay, so if Texas were to secede from the Union, all it would have to say is, we're gonna pass legislation to kick out the federal government. Okay? Then we don't need these roads here anymore, even though we probably still have them. We'd still have them anyway, because the militaries would need to be joined in case of invasion. One central place can have control over all the militaries, because it would keep all the states defense with the sea. Okay, so I hope this made this a little bit easier to understand the difference between the states. So the Constitution did not create the states. The Articles of Confederation acknowledged their independence, and the Constitution created small states, or the legal contracts between the independent state and the dependent states. And that's why people say Texas is special, but in order to secede and kick them out, it can't be the state of Texas doing it. It can't be Abbott. It has to be people that we get together and elect under Republic of Texas positions. And we have to pass legislation as the people, the lawful people of the state. Okay? And that's how that works. And when Texas does it, the empire, including the Federal Reserve, will disappear.